I've been racking my brain for ways to get into the Halloween spirit. It's not far off now, and I really wanted to make this video about something just fabulously horrific. But, we've already done videos on monsters, cosmic horror, nihilistic dread, some of the most terrifying art out there. It would almost seem trite at this point just to do another eye-poppingly gruesome thing. So, I'm turning to the land of Fairytale. One story in particular you've probably never heard of. One of Hans Christian Andersen's least loved and least told stories. But be warned, this story's monster is not fictional. In fact, it's sitting beside you right now, menacing you in ways you may not even be aware of. So, if you are feeling brave enough, turn down the lights, prepare your psyche for a little unexpected trauma, and let me tell you the story of the Shadow. A big thanks to everyone who made this video possible. Everyone who continues to watch, like, subscribe to these videos, and especially all of you who have decided to support the show on Patreon, thank you so much. There is absolutely no way we can make something like this without your help. We love you. So I called the Shadow a fairy tale. Well, before we start, I want you to put away any thoughts you might have about what that means. This is not a pleasant story, and it probably isn't going to end in exactly the way you might hope. But it is a powerful one if you're willing to give it a chance. It begins with a young, learned man who decides to go on holiday. He plans to go hiking and exploring, journeying about all day in the sunlight. But when he arrives, he finds that the country is so hot and so bright that even his shadow shrivels up beneath him to the point that it can barely be seen. Reluctantly, he holes up in the shade of his vacation home for the majority of the trip to avoid the worst of the heat. But even inside the house, it's like an oven. Not quite what he'd been wanting from the trip. That is, until night falls. As the sun dips down past the horizon and the country of light changes to a country of dark, the world comes alive. In the cool evening air, shops throw open their doors and windows, markets fill the streets, children come out to play. All the life and commotion of the day, just past sundown. Even his shriveled shadow in the evening candlelight is able to do some healing. I love how Andersen puts this too. It was really in need of a good stretch to recover its strength, he says, immediately personifying it. Thus, in a region of powerful light, the man finds comfort in the dark and companionship with his own shadow. The only exception to the bustle of the nightlife is the mysterious apartment across the street. At all hours, even during the harsh day, the door stands ajar, and soft, beautiful music can be heard playing from within. Yet, the place seems uninhabited. Whoever lives there is unknown to all their neighbors, even to the landlord himself. One night, while half asleep, the learned man thinks he sees a woman standing there, a vision of beauty, light seeming to stream forth from her. But when he tries to get a closer look, she's gone. Some time passes and his curiosity continues to grow, but he never does much about it. Instead, while sitting on his porch one evening, he notices that the glow of a candle behind him casts his shadow in such a way that it appears to be sitting on the balcony of the mysterious apartment. Jokingly, he tells his shadow that it ought to slip inside and have a look around. He's only having a little fun, of course, sort of talking to himself, but the shadow listens. As the man rises to go to bed, it breaks away and vanishes through the door across the way. That's a pretty wild development, right? Kind of a world-shattering, fantastical, maybe even horrific thing to experience, discovering that you no longer have a shadow? Well, apparently not to this guy. The next day, when he finds his shadow missing, he says verbatim, "I have lost my shadow. So it really did go away yesterday evening, and it has not returned. This is very annoying." So, I guess just feeling sort of vexed, the man finally heads home, where he begins to grow a new shadow. Again, as if this isn't a massive development, he returns to his life as if nothing really happened, plugging away, trying to write books about the true, the good, and the beautiful, as a learned man ought to do, of course. Eventually, after years of this, his old shadow manages to track him down and decides to pay him a visit. It takes a moment for the man to recognize who it is because the shadow is all decked out in finery and really knows how to carry himself. Writes Andersen, the shadow was in fact very well dressed, and this made a man of him. So, regardless of whatever mechanical concerns you might have about this transition from shadow to flesh and blood, the shadow at least appears to be a convincing human now, independent of its old master. Of course, they spend a little while chatting about how extraordinary all of this is, but the learned man can't resist. He inevitably returns to the question of the mysterious apartment and asks the shadow what was inside. Only after extracting a vow of secrecy from the man does the shadow acquiesce. The account he gives is sort of hard to digest. On the one hand, he boasts grandly about how within the house he found poetry itself, learned all there was to learn, and read all the prose and poetry in the world. But then he also says that he couldn't actually enter the house, that as a shadow, the brightness within would have utterly obliterated him, so he was obliged to linger in the anteroom. I smell something fishy here. Regardless, it was enough to change him. Says the shadow, had you gone there, you would not have remained a human being, whereas I became one. And at that moment, I became aware of my inner being, my inborn affinity to the nature of poetry. It is true I did not think much about it while I was with you, but you will remember that I was always much larger at sunrise and sunset, and in the moonlight, I was even more visible than yourself. But I did not yet understand my inner existence. In the anteroom, it was revealed to me. You would think all of this would move the shadow to pursue some grand ideal, wouldn't you? To be the best that it could be? But that's pretty much the opposite of what happens. After receiving all of this knowledge and awareness, after literally becoming an animate creature, its only concern is the impression it can make. It's ashamed of the fact that it lacks clothes and status, that it can't be recognized as great. So what does it do? It slinks about in the night, peering in through windows, over rooftops, invading people's secret lives. And then, with all of the secrets it learns, it creates a weapon. Using the most powerful form of blackmail ever conceived, it extracts from its victims all the wealth and power it needs to make whatever impression it would like at a glance. And so, he came to be, this shadow-turned-man by the grace of his attire. He departs shortly after all of this, leaving his old master shocked, but bound by his word never to tell the tale to another soul. Again, the two spend a great deal of time apart. Again, the learned man attempts his lifelong goal to write meaningful books about the true, the good, and the beautiful. But he continuously finds that his efforts are wasted. People simply aren't interested in what he has to say, and in time the failure begins to weigh on him. His health starts to decline, his finances verging on desperate. People who see him say that he really looks like a shadow, which sends a shiver down his spine. In the valley of his misery, the shadow returns to him once more. He's since become fat and wealthy. Seeing his old master in this state, the shadow offers to take him on a retreat to a healing spa, all expenses paid. Seems like a nice gesture at first, until the shadow gives his condition, that the man play the part of shadow throughout the trip. That they drive together, walk side by side, or one in front of the other according to the position of the sun, that the shadow should always take the position of honor and respect. The learned man thinks to himself that this is going rather too far, but feels obliged to submit given his rather dire circumstances. At first, this scheme pans out pretty well for the shadow. No one seems to be any the wiser. But while they're staying at the spa, they run into a princess who's there to heal a very strange malady. She sees things too clearly, and immediately she can tell that the shadow has no shadow of his own, which makes him a very suspicious figure indeed. Very slyly, he points to his former master and explains that the man is in fact his shadow, just dressed finely and given a shadow of his own. "It is rather expensive," he says, "but I like to have things about me that are peculiar." The audacity of that is just astounding to me. This guy's pretending that he's just so wealthy he can bring his shadow to life and dress it up? Alright, I guess that's fine because the princess accepts it. For the duration of their stay at the spa, the shadow woos the princess until she falls in love with him. Unbeknownst to her, he knows the perfect things to say to her because she was one of his victims during his early years as a shadow. But ever keen-sighted, she still knows there's something off about him and decides to test him in various ways before entertaining the idea of marriage. He passes the majority of these tests easily, but when it comes time to ask him of higher things, philosophy, art, the true, the good, and the beautiful, he cannot answer. She thinks she's caught him out for a moment, but he brushes it off, saying that he talks so much of these things, it's all quite a blur. But if she were to speak to his shadow, he's sure the shadow would have picked up a thing or two from him. And when she does, she's delighted to find out that it's true. What a wonderful man he must be to have such a clever shadow, she thinks to herself. And this seems like the final sign that the two have truly switched places. All of the man's good qualities have simply become a prop for the shadow to lean on. He is reduced to a frail, two-dimensional thing. As the shadow approaches the apex of his power, prepared to marry into royalty, he approaches the learned man and tells him that he will do something unusually good for his old master. He offers to set the learned man up for life. They will be companions. He will give the man $100,000 a year, and he shall live in the shadow's palace and drive with him in his royal carriage, but he must allow everyone to call him a shadow and never tell a soul that he'd ever been a man. And once a year, when the shadow sits on his balcony, the learned man must lie at his feet as a shadow would. This is all too much for the learned man. His reservation finally breaks. He swears to tell the princess directly, but it's too late. He missed the opportunity to control his shadow when it first visited him and bound him into secrecy. He missed the chance to stand up for himself when the shadow bound him into his service. And now, the more powerful of the two, the shadow has him thrown into jail and explains to the princess that his shadow, that is, the learned man, had gone mad, beginning to fancy that he was the master rather than the shadow. Seeing this as an unfortunate streak of mania and thinking it cruel to keep him locked up in such a state, the princess orders the learned man taken care of. So it was that as the wedding bells chimed and the cannons blasted and the whole town cheered for the newlywed couple, the learned man heard nothing of it, for he had already been put to death. Well, I told you it wasn't exactly the happiest fairy tale, didn't I? I can see why people don't tend to tell this one to their kids. It's got much less of that fairy tale wonder we expect, and a lot more adult pessimism. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't tell this story to your kids. Dark as it may be, from the right angle, it radiates hope. Spend enough time thinking about it, and it becomes downright instructive. It's important to think of this story as a cautionary tale rather than a tragic one. It's about a man who, in trying to distance himself from his shadow, ends up subservient to it. And yeah, that is tragic, but it's also almost exactly what a psychologist would mean if they used the term shadow. The Swedish psychologist Carl Jung really pioneered thinking about this aspect of the psyche. He said that everyone carries a shadow, and the less embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. And he described the shadow as everything the person refuses to acknowledge about themselves. Much of therapy, then, is about learning to identify and then confront one's own shadow. In order to develop, we must break down our persona, and that requires an encounter with the shadow. But if we aren't careful, the process also brings with it the danger of falling victim to the shadow. When the conscious mind is shocked, confused, or paralyzed by indecision, that dark side of us may well up and take over. Jung goes on to say that a person who is possessed by their shadow is always standing in their own light and falling victim to their own traps, living below their own level. And this is how we connect to the story of the shadow, why it matters to us as readers. The man in the story enters a region of living night and begins to associate with his own shadow. He becomes acquainted and comfortable with it. But when he glimpses a source of beauty and intrigue which would require him to leave the comfort of his house, enter that world of night properly, he instead sends his shadow off alone, severs it from himself in order to repress his own strong desire. And then, after so long apart, during a time of tumult when the shadow inevitably resurfaces, he is unable to resist and becomes its slave. Truly, the same danger we all face in trying to distance ourselves from our shadows. It cannot be done, and the effort only makes us more vulnerable. So, sort of pessimistic so far. Informative, meaningful, but this isn't the part of the story that radiates hope like I was saying earlier. To find that, I had to turn to an essay about the piece. It's called The Child and the Shadow, and it was written by Ursula K. Le Guin. It is one of the most beautiful pieces of nonfiction I've read in a long time. If you can, please do go read it yourself, but I'll give you the bits that matter for this video. In the essay, she says that the learned man's mistake was not following his shadow into the house across the street. Quote, "Reduced to the language of daylight, Andersen's story says that a man who will not confront and accept his shadow is a lost soul. It also says something about itself, about art. It says that if you want to enter the house of poetry, you have to enter it in the flesh, the solid, imperfect, unwieldy body which has corns and colds and greeds and passions, the body that casts a shadow. It says that if the artist tries to ignore evil, they will never enter into the house of light." Recall how the man tried to write books about the true, the good, and the beautiful, but no one cared? This is why. He lacked the understanding to do it. He was a man who couldn't face himself and thus face the world. How was he ever supposed to write anything meaningful about reality? Carolyn Kaufman, a doctor of psychology, puts this really well. In spite of its function as a reservoir for human darkness, or perhaps because of this, the shadow is the seat of creativity. Thus, in order to reach one's full potential, especially as an artist, they must be willing not only to confront the shadow, but to assimilate it in a way. Le Guin goes on to say in her essay that the only way for one to get past the paralyzing self-blame and self-disgust of responsibility is to really look at the shadow, to face it, warts and fangs and pimples and claws and all, to accept it as a part of themselves. The ugliest part, but not the weakest. For the shadow is a guide, the guide inward and out again, there, as Bilbo the Hobbit said, and back again. The guide of the journey to self-knowledge, to adulthood, to the light. According to Jung, if we can do this, if we can bear to spend time with our shadow, not identifying with it or letting it have any control, but observing it and listening to it, we begin to change. Through this exposure, traits entirely opposite to those within the shadow develop naturally within us. He says that no one should deny the danger of the descent, but every descent is followed by an ascent. To slap a big scholarly word on it, it's a process that he calls enantiodromia, which in ancient Greek philosophy was the idea that opposites naturally emerge from each other. In modern psychology, it refers to behavioral patterns that emerge to oppose existing ones. And, unsurprisingly, you even see this borne out in some of our most beloved stories. Without Gollum to push the situation to its climax and take the plunge into Mount Doom himself, Frodo would have failed his mission to destroy the ring. Without Darth Vader to confront the Emperor, Luke almost certainly would have died. To most of us, our shadows are among the scariest monsters we'll ever have to face. And we're right to be afraid. They can be dangerous, as the tale of the shadow tells us, but it's also impossible to live a whole, fulfilling life without confronting your shadow at some point. Without the shadow to guide you, you might be oblivious to all the things lurking right at the edge of your comfort zone, the beautiful revelations that await you in the world of night, if only you can go without becoming entrapped there. Remember this in your writing when you're considering your character arcs. It's a lovely idea for a character to simply overcome their shadow, but that's not really how it works. You must first confront your shadow, and then befriend it. Your shadow is not your opponent, but your untrustworthy guide. It will take you where you need to go, even while it attempts to fleece you for everything you're worth. Don't be like our learned man, and don't let your characters be. The shadow should never be trusted, but when you're ready, follow it to see where it goes. Learn from it the things you cannot learn in the light. And that would be where the video ends, except I have more to say. There are a lot of other interesting stories that make use of shadows this way that I actually had to trim from the script for time, but I couldn't quite let it all go. I had to keep a full version of the video out there somewhere. It seemed right. Thankfully, there is a place where we can share that stuff, where we don't have to worry about streamlining our content so that it's a perfect fit for attention spans and algorithms. You can watch it over on our creator-owned streaming platform, Nebula. YouTube is a weird place for educational content. It's hard to be as open and honest as you want while trying to satisfy the algorithm and trying to dodge some kind of terrible fate like channel-wide demonetization, which has happened to us. So, a bunch of us creators got together and made our own platform where we don't have to worry about all of that. You can find all of our videos there ad-free and full of additional content we normally have to cut out for YouTube, including the extended version of this video. And we are not the only ones. The same is true for so many other amazing creators. It's basically a safe haven for all the material we wish we could share here. There's usually a few weeks between uploads, so if you want more Tale Foundry in the meantime, come join our community. We have a Discord server that's basically like a big family of creatives, a lot of love there. We also run writing groups on Twitch every week if you want to get some practice in. You can find links to all of it in the description. Hope to see you there. Until then, thanks for watching and keep making stuff up. I'll see you next time. Bye!